Hey friends, I'm Nate and welcome back to Big Nate's Whiskey Lounge. Tonight I'm going to discuss some terms that are common in the bourbon or American whiskey world. These terms you will see fairly often, but might confuse someone that's new. For my pour today, I've picked a bottle that helps check off a lot of these terms and also something that I simply enjoy. So this is Henry McKenna, 10-year, single barrel, bottled in bond. I'm going to pour some and I'm going to nose it throughout. So let's do that and then let's dive in. So first, let's discuss what is whiskey. Now whiskey across the international board can be described simply as grain, alcohol, aged. You can take any grain, put it in a mash bill, ferment it, distill it, and age it in wood, and then bottle it at a minimum of 40% ABV or 80 proof. That's the simple definer of whiskey. Second, what is bourbon? Bourbon is solely an American spirit. You can match everything about a bourbon, but if it's not made in America, it cannot be called bourbon. This has been in place since the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, and bottled in bond I'll discuss in a moment. Also note that bourbon does not have to come from Kentucky. That's very controversial, but it's actually legally true. While Kentucky is the most famous for bourbon, it's not required to be from that state. There are plenty of fantastic bourbons that don't come from Kentucky. To meet bourbon requirements, the mash bill or grain recipe has to contain at least 51% corn. Common bourbons carry a recipe of that's at least 51% corn. Then they'll put in a secondary grain of rye and then malted barley, usually in decreasing amounts. Now, other distillers will do what's called a wheated bourbon or a wheater, and rather than rye as the second grain, they'll do wheat. Some very famous wheaters would be Maker's Mark or even Pappy. Also Larceny, which is produced by Heaven Hill, who also makes this Henry McKenna. This is a rye bourbon, but Larceny is a wheated bourbon. And bourbon also has to be aged in new charred oak barrels. Now let's discuss straight. Straight means that the whiskey was aged a minimum of 2 years. A caveat to that is that if the bourbon is under 4 years old, the distillery has to disclose the age on the bottle. So if it's under 4, let's say it's 28 months old with 2 years, 4 months, the distillery would have to say so. In my Wild Turkey Rare Breed video that came out on November 9th, give that a check out, I mentioned that it did not have an age statement, therefore we know that it's at least 4 years old. Now age statements can be a bit confusing. When a bottle states how old it is, this actually means that that's what the youngest barrel is. When age stating, a distillery is required to cite the youngest barrel used. Now there may be 6, 8, 10, or even 18-year-old barrels in the blend that made up the bottle you're drinking from, but the distillery cannot say it's 18 years old or average those ages together. They have to state the youngest barrel as the official age. Now they can say how old all of the whiskeys in the blend are, and that's actually something really cool and a lot of whiskey nerds such as myself really enjoy. One distillery that tends to do this a lot is Bardstown in Kentucky. On the side of their bottle, I have a bottle of Bardstown Fusion, and I'll review it someday, and they have on the back all the whiskeys that went into it and how old they were. Fifth on our list is going to be single barrels. Now this is not too confusing, as it simply means that the bottle you're drinking from came from one barrel and not as part of a blend. Blends is called the original single barrel. Single barrels can be good or simply they can be crap. That's what makes them a fun adventure. Most bourbons are a blend from a lot of barrels, which when put together, they create the flavor profile that particular whiskey is known for. Single barrels have a lot less yield and they can be prized commodities. A lot of whiskey tube channels will do single barrel picks to sell to their community of fans, and also local liquor stores will also do barrel picks to sell in their stores. And that's really cool because you will never get that particular bourbon again. It's unique. Behind me, I have approximately a dozen or so single barrels that come from either my local store or from other whiskey tube channels. Now, proof or ABV, alcohol by volume. I'm not going to science this portion because, quite frankly, I can't. But they are two different terms that mean the same thing, and that is alcohol content. Proof is the higher number, and ABV is the smaller number. Notice that the ABV is always mathematically half of whatever the proof is. So if you have an 80 proof whiskey, 40% is the ABV, 120, 60. This Henry McKenna is 100 proof, which means that it's 50% alcohol by volume. Now there's another set of terms, which is barrel proof, cask strength, and full proof. Now barrel proof and cask strength mean the same thing. Full proof is different. Barrel proof and cask strength means that whatever the proof was when they dumped the bourbon, that's what went straight into the bottle. They did not add water to lower the proof or to stretch the whiskey. Full proof is whenever they distilled the whiskey and they put it into a barrel, whatever the proof was when they put it into the barrel, they have to bring it back down to that. And that can get a little confusing, but the alcohol content in whiskey goes up as it ages, and so in order to get back to full proof, they need to put water into it. In America, at least when it comes to bourbon or American whiskey, the highest alcohol content legally allowed to go into a barrel is 125 proof, which is 62.5% ABV. Now it comes off the still higher, so they have to add water to bring it down to 125. Then they put it in the barrel, it ages, it goes up oftentimes, and they bring it back down to 125. Now, not all distilleries use 125 as their full proof. They're not legally required to. That's just the limit that they can go up to. One famous exception is Old Forester. Their full proof level is 115, which is 57.5% ABV. Now, bottled and bond. I mentioned the Bottled and Bond Act earlier. And that is a strict guideline for making bourbon. It's not required today because there are requirements, but they don't have to be as strict as the Bottled and Bond Act. But this is the standard that came out in the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897 that the U.S. Congress passed. And in order to meet the requirements of bottled and bond, you have to do four things. One is that it has to be distilled and produced by one single distillery. Second is that the grain used in the mash bill has to come from one growing season. Now there are 2 growing seasons per year, January to June and July to December. All the grain used in the mash bill has to come from one single growing season. So fall, winter of 21. So from July to December of 21, that would be one growing season. 3, it has to be aged a minimum of 4 years in new charred oak barrels, and it has to be under government supervised rick houses. So rick houses are the big buildings that they age whiskey in, and those are under government supervision during the aging process. And 4th is that the proof or ABV has to be 100 proof 100, or 50% ABV. So that's the terms I'm going to do today. Let me know if I missed some that really should have been in this list. But now to this Henry McKenna. This is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It is 10 years old. It's a single barrel, and it's bottled and bond. This is barrel number 9854. It doesn't give a bottle number, just gives a barrel number. And this was barreled on February 4th of 2010. And so it would have been dumped after February 4th of 2020. Now this comes from Heaven Hill Distillery, which is famous for brands such as Evan Williams and Elijah Craig. You may have heard about them recently if you're new to whiskey, you may have heard about them in the news because their workers recently went on strike, but it seems like they worked it out, and hopefully for the benefit of the workers. Now the price on this I'm a little bit embarrassed by. Frankly, I got burned. I paid $99.99 for this. In reality, this shouldn't cost any more than $69.99, and some people think it should be cheaper. But in my area, other places I've seen at $69.99 is pretty much the going rate, and I wouldn't complain for that. But the chain liquor store in my area took me for the fool that I am, and they got about $30 more out of me than frankly they should have. But we live, we learn, and we drink bourbon. So let's give this a nose here. Now I did the Wild Turkey Rare Breed yesterday. Obviously this is less than that because it's 16.8 proofs less. That was 116.8, this is 100. So it obviously is less. So I'm not getting much ethanol. I'm getting kind of a floral note on it. It's pretty. I'm not necessarily getting fruity. I know oftentimes fruity and floral, you either get one or the other, or sometimes I mix of both. I'm getting more floral than fruity. And there is a bit of char in there, but it's not aggressive. Sometimes barrel char can be aggressive, and this is not, but I can get it in there. So let's have a taste. It does not drink hot. I smelled it in the bottle, which isn't necessarily recommended because you're not going to get accuracy. I smelled it in the bottle, and I got kind of a weird minty note, but I'm not getting it now. I am getting a kind of a stone fruitiness, maybe a touch of apple. But yeah, oakiness, a little bit of leather. Overall, if I were going to grade this, I'd probably go with a 7. I'd like to give it lower simply because I got burned on it, but that's not Henry McKenna's fault, that's the store's fault. So, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and give me comments. I value your input and your suggestions. Cheers.